So, ladies and gentlemen, a warm welcome. Good morning. And I need to say that I'm really happy that all my guests today are connected with Trilateral Commission somehow. As you know, Trilateral is coming to Ljubljana for the first time in history, and we will talk about different topics today and during the weekend. So let me announce who will join me on stage, but I hope the idea will work, because, you know, Theresa May kind of like inspired us, and we decided that we'll ask their favorite song. So I'll tell who they are, then I hope the song will play. Let's see if they will do some brave moves. They skip my song, so, you know, I practice for the whole week my moves, but okay, you will see it next time. But, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really proud that Claudia Olsen, who's the founder and a CEO of Exponential AB, young global leader of World Economic Forum, and David Rockefeller Fellow, is with us. Can we get the music? Perfect. Then we have a gentleman called Hans Weyers. Hans has so many important roles, so I'll definitely skip some, but I'll tell some others. So he's the chairman of Heineken, he's the chairman of supervisory board of Inc., he's non-executive director of GSK, he's former CEO and chairman of AkzoNobel. He's also former Minister of Economic Affairs and former Minister of Finance of the Netherlands. Hans, please come on stage after the music.
No.
We have another amazing lady called Sonja Schmutz, who is a general manager of Chamber of Commerce and Industry of Slovenia. And I need to tell something. I'm really proud of all important, influential Slovenian women, and I really want to say it publicly from this stage, and I'm happy, Sonja, you're here with us. And then we have another gentleman who is very connected with Trilateral Commission in Slovenia, Marko Voljč, who is the first Slovenian member. Policy Associate of Central and Eastern Europe at Uber, and also the David Rockefeller Fellow. So, a warm welcome to everyone, but a special welcome to Slovenia, to Claudia and Hans. We're really happy you came here. Today we will try to travel around the world with globalization and connectivity. And we might sound like we are saving the world, but we will do our best to kind of like to be concrete with examples, ideas, and also solutions. Yes, we will talk about technology, so guys, get ready. The achievement of the industrial and information age are shaping the world, I would say, that is both more dangerous on one side and richer with opportunities than ever before. Some call it even the paradox of progress. So as you are kind of like connected with Trilateral, let me read what Parakaman wrote. We are accelerating into a future shaped less by countries than by connectivity. Mankind has a new maxim. Connectivity is destiny. And the most connected powers and people will win. What is Trilateral Commission? How would you describe it if we maybe start with you, Hans and Marco? And I hope this microphone works.
Does it work? It does not. Yeah, it works. Okay, so the Trilateral is actually all about connecting. The whole idea about the Trilateral is to bring people from business, from government, from academia, from press, all kind of areas from across the globe together with the sole purpose and duty to think about solutions for the big geopolitical, geoeconomic questions. And that on the basis of a couple of shared values about democracy, rule of law, human rights, etc. So that is what Trilateral is all about. And we meet twice a year, but these meetings are, of course, also the starting point for many personal relations, and people continue to be connected like we are.
Perfect. Where Marco, conspiracy theory is coming in it, if you would comment that?
Well, of course, Trilateral, since its inception in 1973, has always been a sore point for those who believe that whoever wants to do something outside the normal institutions, states, United Nations, is suspicious of some illegal or at least not very honest intentions. And therefore, there were a number of people, those who were excluded and those who felt that they were not in the right part of the world, mainly following the three rules that Hans mentioned: democracy, rule of law, and, shall we say, respecting human rights. We're always suspicious that the Trilateral is trying to do something which should be viewed with, shall we say, doubts, and maybe even that the intentions are not good. I would say that, following what Hans was saying, we are a network in an interconnected world. We'll talk about connectivity a lot. This has been an early predecessor of network as opposed to institutions and structures that started, of course, in the North Atlantic area and included Japan, but it has grown over decades into something which is truly important. I think a number of outstanding individuals with concerns about the world, but also trying to find solutions, not always to the liking of everybody that observes us, but nevertheless, I think we have made an important contribution over the past decades, and admittedly, we're now faced with serious challenges ourselves looking forward.
So, Sonia, Chamber of Commerce is the organizing partner of the Trilateral in Slovenia. So, how do you see this event as a non-trilateral member?
Well, first of meeting with Trilateral is you start looking at who are the members to get, because whatever you talk, it depends on who is doing the talking. And it's an impressive group of people with immense influence just because of the positions that they were able to, not to achieve, but to be successful in the positions where they were. And with that influence and power also comes responsibility. And I see that that's what Trilateral tries to do, to use this power that is individual, but when put collectively, it's an enormous brain trust to talk about the issues that are so to core and in endangering our social prosperity, in a way. So the French had the term noblesse oblige, and I think that is something that's connecting the Trilateral so strongly.
Claudia and Mark Boris, before we go to the topic like connected generations, even Trilateral wants to get younger. I have this feeling, David Rockefeller Fellows, is that the future of Trilateral?
I certainly hope that we have a possibility to have an impact. And looking at what we discussed in terms of conspiracy theories and the notion of the trilateral, what I believe is that we need more platforms to meet, more opportunities to connect and bring together people that have influence, that can drive impact in different areas. So the more of these kind of platforms we have, the more change we can actually achieve. And being a fellow, a young leader in this forum is really inspiring, because in the room and in this platform, we have leaders that were the ones that not only ideated, but actually implemented the foundation for the European Union, that designed systems for free trade, that truly drove some of the biggest differences and the biggest changes we have had during the past decades. So that's very inspiring for us as the younger generation to really challenge us to also address the risks we see, the challenges, and to make a difference. But I also believe that we can influence a lot the dialogues and also bring to the attention the possibilities that, for example, new technologies have, whether it's AI or blockchain, or whether it's the possibilities of the sharing economy, which my colleague Mark Boris is very much a part of. So I think we have a lot to learn, and I hope that it will continue to be a very integrated forum for exchange of ideas that brings action.
I would just add that when it comes to the Trilateral Commission and all the conspiracy theories, I can only say that it's all true. Absolutely true. I would say for us, the younger members or the younger generation of the Trilateral Commission, this is an enormous opportunity to learn from the greats and to very openly discuss the subjects that define our era. Now, one of the things that is usually being criticized at the Trilateral Commission is that all the discussions are happening behind closed doors. Now, in the era of unlimited connectiveness, this actually makes a lot of sense, because people truly have an opportunity to come together and speak very openly and freely about the key topics. And speaking openly and freely today isn't something that happens often. And I think having this kind of format actually allows these people, all of us, to discuss and actually come to solutions that might be a bit controversial, but are the right ones. So I think this is one of the lessons. And I would just say at the end that we have absolutely nothing to fear, but fear itself.
I think that's the right time that I also greet some other members of David Rockefeller Fellow, because they sat down on the second table, and I would like that Slovenia use the opportunity to meet those incredible young Europeans. So guys, can you just wave so they will see where you are? Perfect. They are a bit tired because we just came yesterday around midnight from a great dinner, but they will get the energy, and then you will understand why they are here. So it's time for kind of like the real first topic, connected generation, and it is my pleasure and also a deep hope that we will be able to meet my dear friend Tim Schosch, who's a young diplomat and who will kind of like challenge us today. So let's have fingers crossed the technology and the voice is working, and let's see the first movie.
We live in a hyper-connected world, but what we often forget is how interdependent we are because of our connectedness. Like it or not, we are in it together, for better or worse. Technological accelerations create opportunities. However, our ability to adapt to the speed of technological change is lagging behind. It opens new questions such as privacy, security, and adequate skills. How can we ensure that the future is human-powered and not machine-powered? This tweet from a few weeks ago can easily sum up our first topic. What happens when different generations have an insanely wide gap of their ability to tap into the opportunities the technological development is bringing? Many of our societies are aging, and the pressure on younger generations to provide for old is growing. Meanwhile, technological accelerations give the young the ability to address many of these challenges. But question for you, how can we close the gap of understanding technology and avoid the clash of generations?
I really think that Tim is betting on you, my dear panel, that you will solve the world and make the role of UN in about an hour. So let's try that. How we can ensure that the future is human-powered and not machine-powered? Hans, are you technology lover or a hater? Skip the technician problem at the beginning. But what is the role of technology from business point of view?
Well, I would like to take a little bit broader than just a business point of view. I think it's a major engine. It's a potential engine of solving many of the problems we have ahead of us. If you just think about healthcare or education, there's massive opportunities. If we use modern technology the proper way, that will solve potentially big problems or already existing problems. So access to education, for instance, if you see what you can do with modern technology, but also if you see how artificial intelligence could help us to significantly improve the quality and accessibility of healthcare. Now, that is not a given, because like many of these changes, we need cooperation between business, government, science. I think the key issue here is actually about education, empowering people to help them to manage the technology, to master the technology, and use it in the right direction. At this point in time in the Western world, we significantly underinvest in education, both at the youngest level, but also at what we invest in our universities. There's just a couple of hotspots in the world where a lot of the money goes, and at the same time we underinvest in our societies in education. So much better primary education, but also far more money in Europe particularly to universities to help with computer scientists. We need far more of those people to educate data scientists, and then have the right kind of regulations to protect also the privacy of our people. Those are very important things that you have to do on top of investing far more in technology. Technology is a potential force to improve the world.
Claudia, I think I couldn't do the better introduction for your statement in sense where the technology is going, because you are dealing a lot with technology in education. So where is it going? But maybe you should tell a couple of words what you're doing.
Absolutely. So Exponential works a lot with upskilling, lifelong learning, and programs to help professionals learn digital skills and digital leadership. And this is something where we're truly seeing a tremendous gap, because our educational systems have been built for K-12, for the primary education. We have universities, and then at a higher level, there are executive programs. But in between, there's truly a gap in terms of developing much more professional education. The World Economic Forum just recently published a report highlighting that by 2022, we need to spend roughly 101 days learning to be able to keep up with the technological progress. Technologies are developing very fast. We're seeing also on a global level that currently we have roughly 47% of the global population online. The coming years, the remaining 53% will come online and contribute and continue developing innovation and knowledge. That means that the change that is happening now will happen even faster. We will innovate faster, we will disseminate information, and we need, first of all, to accept this and basically embrace the change and understand that in any generational, in any age, you really need to continue learning to keep up. But also, we need to really understand that if we need to, like World Economic Forum states, learn for 101 days until 2022, that means that in every company, every employee needs to spend 3-4 hours per week learning. And our systems aren't tailored for that yet. So looking at the most important skills for the years to come, it will definitely be the ability to take in new information and to apply it. I should also mention, it's quite interesting, European Commission looked into how many hours we as office workers spend on communicating or searching for information per week, and came up that we spend roughly 28 hours per week in front of our computers communicating and searching for information. But the way we do it is very much the same way we've done it the past years. Very few people look into how they can increase their own digital productivity. And at the same time, technology is developing very fast. So I think it's extremely important that we also realize our own potential in relation to the technology by learning and by improving our knowledge of digital skills.
What happens when different generations have this insanely wide gap of their ability to tap into the opportunities that technology development is bringing. Mark, Boris, when I say Uber, I would think you're betting on young people. Am I right?
I'm betting on everyone. And I think this is an important point to make. First of all, I agree with everything you've said, but I think we can avoid the clashes between generations, between any parts of the society, by basically having more respect towards each other, by listening to each other. I think technology cannot solve this fundamental problem. And I think we live in a world where there's the right that's not listening to the left, the cities are not listening to the countryside, the West is not listening to the East, the South doesn't care about the North. So basically we're facing a number of gaps in our societies that cannot be addressed through any technological means. They can only be addressed by a change of attitude, by having more respect towards each other, no matter how different we are. And if I may return back to the first point about the Trilateral Commission. Now, it's incredibly hard to forge a conspiracy theory among people that are so incredibly diverse as the member of Trilateral Commission are. You have people coming from all walks of life, from all political backgrounds, united with certain values and with a vision to basically contribute to this world. So I think it's more about respect and attitude than the technology itself. And going back to my previous point, I think we have nothing to fear when it comes to technology. I think we should be open to change and innovation. And let's not forget that Europe is not the world, that we have China racing ahead, that we have the United States racing ahead, and Europe is somehow lagging behind. So we need to not come to a state when we're paralyzed because we analyze too much. Let's just go with it and make the most of it.
You can do that, of course. Marco, if you look banking from when you started your career and today, I would say a lot has changed, and probably technology has changed a lot the banking. So is it possible to close this gap, or you think the gap between the generation will become just bigger and bigger?
Well, when I started banking, there was this cliche that we said that the bankers live by the 3-6-3 rule, namely that we take the money at 3%, we pass it on at 6%, and we're at the golf course at 3 p.m. Now, those days are long gone, essentially. It probably was even then a myth, but nevertheless, the banking industry, the finance in general, have come a long way. Certainly the power of banks and bankers, and I should say this with some humility, has been reduced, thank God. The asymmetry of information has been reduced, like in many other businesses, because of this connectivity and the access to information 24/7, real time, and so on. And the whole notion of what finance and banking mean has changed dramatically and will never be the same. We may have crises, we may have reversals, but finance today and of the future is not the one that we read about when you study the Rothschilds and the Morgans and all the distinguished banking dynasties and history of central banking and so on. And even banks as institutions today are totally different from where they were before. And those who don't accept that the customer truly is at the center and the customer truly is king will suffer or have already suffered. So essentially, if I look back 40 years ago and now, probably the landscape of banking is beyond recognition. You have nowadays technologies that pretty much transformed everything so that the regulators have to catch up and understand. You cannot resist blockchain. You cannot ignore fintech. You cannot somehow oppose to the idea that nowadays you have an intelligent phone like the Chinese do, and they have leapfrogged big time, and they do all the payments right there. I mean, forget about checks and credit cards and what have you. So these are things where even the older generation eventually can learn. Technology in banking and finance should be such that it's relatively user-friendly for an old man like me or people who have not even gone through these various stages of innovation in finance and banking. And therefore, I'm in this respect optimistic. We have to be careful to find the proper balance between the regulation and the creativity. And here Europe sometimes is erring on the conservative, and therefore we are lagging behind in many respects, not only vis-à-vis the Americans, but more importantly vis-à-vis the Chinese that are really rushing ahead in popular use of finance in a very natural way. It's nothing fashionable, they just do it in a natural way. And that's where I think the challenge, since this is a European Trilateral Commission meeting, we should really look at say, are we doing enough? I mean, there's tremendous qualities in this continent in our values and tradition and the, shall we say, approach towards the haves and have-nots, but we are also lagging behind and should be, to a certain extent, learning from those who are at the forefront.
Sonia, maybe to conclude this topic, we would like to hear Slovenian business view on technology and also on the gap between generations. Is this a topic that is often discussed here?
Well, I think that the gap between generations was always there. If we read the Cicero or whoever, they talk the same as we do now. But what changed is that we are first time in humankind history facing with so many, so fast changes in technology that it's the older needing to learn from the young, and not just older passing the knowledge to the young. So that shift is getting much more balanced. If we used to live in an era of Senate, now is the era of juvenile, if I put it correctly. And that also puts completely new aspect in how you do business, because it's not anymore the CEO, the presidents that are the smartest in the house, but it's much more leveled. People who are there for longer time have different sets of experience. They have the lifetime knowledge, and they also can be maybe a better judge of how to actually put the technology in practical use, but not necessarily understanding how that works. So and that's something that the youngsters know much better because they were grown with it, they breathe it in itself. But coming to Slovenia, I think we're way past whether we need to digitally transform. That's ticked. We definitely are on that path. And if we look at the strategic research, innovative partnerships, which is they come out from the smart specialization that EU demanded of us. We put 9 fields where we see that we can make a huge breakthrough because we have competencies in it. And technology is part of the horizontal of each of them. So it's also in a, let's say, in a concept of how to develop the economy in itself, and also each companies know that they have to do something and be bold. Maybe we're not that bold in those steps. If you're a smaller company, you can be more vulnerable than if you're big and you have some money, you know, to okay, if that doesn't work, we'll still survive. If you're smaller, you have to be much more careful with your resources. So maybe that's what keeps us a little bit cautious on how fast to go forward, because if you bet on a wrong technology, well, you bet your company.
Yes.
Maybe just one thing. So I stopped worrying about this technology gap ever since I received a friend request from my mother on Facebook. Of course, I haven't accepted it. But I want to say, back to Hans's point, that businesses today play a crucial role in the society and therefore bear great responsibilities. And that's why I think we all salute Emmanuel Macron's Tech for Good initiative. Uber also took part in that conference and in that project. And we also pledged to basically offer social protection to all of our self-employed partners. And this is just one of the cases how basically companies must and can contribute to European social model and basically complement the rule of the state, or let's say the role of a state, wherever we can. And this is something that we should take very seriously and that we should do now.
Hans, yes, but I also wanted to ask a little bit personal question to you. You are chairman of prominent companies, and what Sonia said before, how do you deal with these ignorant, proactive, I don't know how you call them, millennials, you know, the smart guys who are knocking on your doors and they think that they're smarter than you?
Well, you basically tell them, go and do it. I mean, let's be very clear. I'm involved in large companies, but they compete with all kind of startups. Companies like, they were mentioned, of course, the Tencent, Alibabas, they were not on the radar screen 10 years ago. They're now the most valuable companies. Uber is another one. Amazon was declared almost dead 15 years ago, I think. So the world is changing very rapidly. So don't think that, you know, large companies, you still have people smoking cigars in their boardrooms contemplating what to do for lunch. Absolutely not. I mean, one of the organizations I'm involved in is ING. It's a large bank. We talk about what does the platform economy mean? How do we participate in that? Exactly the issues you mentioned. How do you put the customer central? With which fintechs do we actually have joint ventures? Whom do we buy or whom do we work together on? How do we control the platform ourselves? So that's one. So we're in the middle of it. And if you're not in the middle of it, even as a large established company, you're almost dead. Secondly, about helping your own employees to empower them basically in this world with a lot of changes. You have to realize that the older you get, and that starts very early, after your 30s basically, people of that age learn basically 85% of the things that people learn is by doing it. It's not by studying it. So it is far more, it's about training partially, but far more important is how you organize your work. Do you have agile working environments or do you have classical hierarchical working environments? What are the loops in terms of learning from innovative process? I mean, all these kind of things are in the heart of those large companies that want to survive and need to survive. And thanks God, I'm part of it. It's very exciting.
Good. So, but the main question might be also, do you have opportunity to do all this? So I think it's a time for a second challenge, and connected by equality. Let's listen to Tim.
The future is already here. It's just not evenly distributed. However, in 2018, this is not science fiction anymore. In a well-functioning market economy, opportunities to receive an education, have a good job, and earn sufficient income should not be limited on the basis of person's gender, race, place of birth, or parental background. But what happens when a person's potential to succeed in life is simply determined by the lottery of birth? We call this inequality of opportunity. Let's take a look. Children in sub-Saharan Africa are 14 times more likely to die before the age of 5 than children in Europe. In most countries, women earn only between 60 and 75% of men's wages for the same work. Less than 6% of the value of a chocolate bar reaches cocoa farmers. So the question for you is, what do we need to do to create a world that will provide equal opportunities for all?
So, lottery of birth, said nicely Tim. So, maybe a bit personal question, Claudia, but have you ever thought about how your life would be different if you were born outside Europe?
Absolutely. I've lived in India, Singapore, Germany, France, Poland, and the US, which has always brought me the question, what would that mean if I was born in these countries? And something I'm really contemplating a lot is how we should make sure that technology doesn't become a great divider, but actually an equalizer. And it's quite interesting. I had a few interesting experiences the last 2 years. For example, in April, I was invited to Borneo, to Malaysia, to the Sarawak region. And in the Sarawak region, which is of course very known for the fantastic jungles, they also have a very big digital economy conference. They bring together 2,400 people that get to try and explore the new technologies in the region. So I was really impressed to see facial recognition technologies being used in the region, self-driving cars being tried out. In the Sarawak region, they even established their own Sarawak Pay system, so basically cashless and credit cardless payment systems. But what probably was the most memorable experience was when I went into the jungle in Borneo, and I spent 2 hours looking at the trees, the plants, the animals, and I would be asking my guide in the jungle about all of them. And at the end of this guided tour in the jungle, and the guide turns to me and says, "Claudia, can I ask you a question?" And I expected him to ask me maybe about Sweden, or maybe about Europe, or my own life. But instead he turned to me and said, "Claudia, is now a good time to invest in Bitcoin?" And this shows very much, how globalized technology has become, and basically how accessible it is, how much it's uniting us. But at the same time, we're also seeing that this technology and these developments need to be applied to actually building a good infrastructure, healthcare, education, and basically the welfare services. And we need to look at this not as a just national or regional issue, but we need to look at it globally, because we are so interconnected. So I think it's interesting because some countries, I was just in Dubai last weekend, and Dubai, for example, and the United Arab Emirates are working very much with their happiness agenda to really maximize the happiness of the citizens. And I believe that to be able to maximize the wellness and happiness of citizens in one region, we really also need to look at the happiness and wellness and living standard on the global level, because we are so interconnected. So yes, I do think a lot about what it means that I've been born in Sweden, and to see also how we can make sure that the know-how, that the technological developments we have in the Nordics can be transferred, shared, and improve the global living standards.
I'll not ask to share advice on Bitcoin from the stage, but I'm sure that Claudia is willing to discuss that after with you. Hans, being, as we said, part of big companies, I have 3 facts I would like to share with you. 70% of the world's population holds only 3% of global wealth. Around the world, 63 million girls are currently out of school. That is almost the size of the entire population of United Kingdom. And according to the World Economic Forum, as current rates of change of the global economic gender gap at work will not be closed for 217 years. How this resonate to you? What we are doing wrong at the moment, and what we should change to change these statistics?
Well, first of all, I don't believe those kind of extrapolations that you just gave, because I believe in exponential change. Mm-hmm. And if I go back only 10 years and I see what has happened to life expectancy in this world across the globe, if I see what kind of change we have seen in many Asian countries, for instance, and Latin American countries as well, I'm far more optimistic than these trends suggest. But there's a couple of rules that we have to try to apply across the globe. I mean, why are there countries where there's so much poverty, so little progress, where the gender gap actually increases rather than decreases? It has to do with good governance. It has to do with democracy. It has to do that there is competition among political parties or political institutions to get the vote of the people, that property rights are actually guaranteed, that there is sufficient education, investment in education. Those are the kind of basic rules that create the conditions for significant progress. If you then add technology to that, you see exponential growth, exponential change and improvement. So much is about creating systems in the world that actually force countries not to allow the kind of backwardness that still exists in many of these countries where these things happen. So it's basically creating the right kind of institutional conditions, and then making sure that the money does not go into a couple of pockets, but actually goes into investments in the future of those countries. And then I'm absolutely convinced we'll move in this direction. And as I think we have a moral duty to be an optimist, I think that's where we're going.
Perfect. So Marco, what Hans said, is it possible that individuals, but also groups, and especially the governments, will kind of like renegotiate their expectations on one another to create kind of like, let's say, political new order or new society in area where the empowered individuals and also rapidly changing economies are? Do we need to create kind of like a new world order, or we just sit and follow the status quo?
Well, I guess neither of the two are particularly appealing, because a creation of a new world order requires very radical changes that usually happen through deep economic crisis or wars. As we all know, if you look at the cases when you have an ascending power and a descending power, and we are just witnessing something like this now, very often it ends up in conflict, which may redistribute in a radical way all the, shall we say, inequalities of the world, but at a tremendous cost, human life and of course suffering and so on. So accepting the status quo is obviously no option either, because it leads us to where we are now. We have nationalism, we have 1% versus 99%, we have differences between gender and generations and so on, and something needs to be done. How to achieve this in an orderly way without really being too slow or too radical to disrupt all the processes of this world is a big question. And here, of course, technology can be a blessing and a curse, and we have to use it very, very, shall we say, prudently. Whether we have the wisdom is a big question mark. Whether societies, leaders, and everybody around this world can find the modus operandi of how to address these issues is, to me, a very big question. Expecting that somebody will do this for us is an illusion. Thinking that it will all happen from bottom up may not be particularly, shall we say, welcoming either, and therefore we need to somehow welcome and encourage initiatives that come top down, bottom up. I would just give, since Claudia mentioned her experience in Borneo, last Saturday I spent, some of you may know, part of my time in Mexico and part in this great country of ours here, and last Saturday I was in a poor village in one of the poorest states in Mexico called Oaxaca, talking to people who deal with rural education, helping rural schools. The government provides only very basic things. They pay for the 2 teachers who are there, and everything else has to be provided either by parents, families, and by families usually in Mexico and so many other places it means women, because men are not very responsible and do things that are perhaps destroying value rather than bringing up their kids, and whoever wants to help something. So we were there, and they said, look, you could devote so much money to build another classroom and maybe some equipment for school, but where we really see the added value is if you could provide some money for the internet, because the terrain in Oaxaca is impossible. There are places where you cannot go by car because there's no roads, maybe on a donkey, or you walk. Or use a helicopter, of course, that's more rare. So if we connected, the lady says, all these various schools in a territory which is next to impossible to access, kids will have access to all the information that is needed to reduce the inequality gap of opportunity. And we said, well, maybe this is probably a much better way to spend the money than bricks and mortar. But it was their initiative, it was their thought, and we also said, of course, if you are going to provide everything else, if you, the mothers, families, will take care of the proper use of this, we'll be happy to do it. And you can just see in the eyes of these kids how excited, how eager they are, and there's no multitasking, nobody looks at their little phone, they are just playing and eager to embrace the future. So in this respect, technology can do wonders, but there has to be political will and determination to do these things.
Sonia, you are a member of many highest Slovenian bodies, Social Economic Council, for example. Am I too critical in an aspect to Slovenia when I say that, you know, I have a feeling that we are talking about local issues and we are forgetting about global risk and opportunities. And let me be concrete, you know. I have a feeling that no one in Slovenia is really talking about artificial intelligence and the influence of that, of the future of the work and employment, but we're still dealing a lot with minimum wage.
Well, thank you for the question, but if you allow me a little bit of the comment of before, sometimes it's good to go a little bit back to understand how we got where we are. And after the Second World War, we could see, after the first years, which were probably, since I wasn't there, but understanding it was very difficult. But then somehow it picked up, and the distribution of new created wealth was distributed much more fairly than it is today. And that got me thinking, and I went a little bit researching, okay, how could that go so wrong after the 60s? So somewhere in the 70s, it started changing rapidly. And one of the facts is actually women employment. Women starting getting into the labor market, and with additional income to the families, the men were not anymore under such a pressure of bringing more money for providing for the families, so the wages could stay lower than they did before. So they didn't grow as much as they did, because now you had, instead of one income, you had two income households. So women empowerment, which you know I'm quite fond of, but in that regard actually lowered the distribution of the wealth for the singular person or the family. So that's something that went wrong. And the other, since I have such a great panel here, I must say the financial industry just as well. In the 70s, it started being very, very deregulated. It did also have a positive impact on the world growth, but also it turned out to be a very dangerous situation. But not only because of the global crisis that happened, but when you become, in some countries, 40% of the GDP from the financial industry, when so much money is there, it means that you take the best brains from the university to go and create ununderstandable instruments that just make money without making real value. And so the real sectors, if I call that, the industry, also could not choose anymore between so many smart people as before, because they chose to go somewhere where they could be paid much more. So that was also part of the problem. Now, knowing that doesn't fix anything, but it's good just to understand of how things are. And in that, to change, some of that is, as Hans said before, institutional understanding and what you have to do as the society so that we can level the playground for many people. But then again, in Slovenia, we like to take the responsibility instead of the individual. That should not be. That is fake solidarity. As a society, we need to make everything that anybody, whatever it comes from a well-off or poor background, is able to fulfill its own potential. And that's what we, as a let's say, civilized society, need to create. But when you put that, then it is on the individual to use that possibility and to work on it, and not that we feel sorry for anybody who maybe didn't take the opportunities, but just wants to have the same level of life quality than anybody else. We are working as social beings, so we need to contribute. We can't just lay back. And sometimes when we talk about universal income, I am worried, because I'm not sure of what sort of a psychological impact that would have for the mankind. It's something like a permissive upbringing of children. It turned out to be a disaster in a way. So we need a little bit more of a lot of social conscious, but also, as we are now told as parents, set the boundaries. And sometimes, at least in Slovenia, we don't want to talk about the boundaries because it could be hurtful or politically incorrect. And now coming to the Economic Social Council, if we wouldn't have such a body, we would have to make it up. We need that. It is a platform where social partners can and have and must talk and decide. What we are worried is that sometimes it's used just for talk and not for coming to a common solutions. But either it's we from the business trying to find another way around where we know that something that will be difficult to go through that body, or it's some other part of the Economic Social Council trying to find another shortcut. That's not a good thing. And after the independence of Slovenia, this was also very difficult, but that was the body that helped us go through the most critical years. And I would very much love to see that we come back to that, to the hard talks, but to understanding, to respect of each partner, and knowing that we share the responsibility of how it will be tomorrow, not only who gets the political points.
Mark, Boris, I don't want to make a pressure on you, but you are blocking the sustainable development in sense of timing. But I would still like that you wrap it up and kind of like try to offer the magic stick. What do we need to do to create kind of like a world that will provide the equal opportunities for all? At least where we should start.
So I think there are three fundamental principles. It's open market, free trade, and the rule of law. And these are, I think, the three pillars of any successful and sustainable economy or democracy for that matter. I used to work in Africa, in a very poor country called Sierra Leone, which is poor even by African standards. And I would say just like this: let's not send development aid. Let's tear down trade barriers. Let farmers from Nigeria sell their crops to the West. Let entrepreneurs from Cambodia sell their products to the West, which is today close to impossible. And I would again agree with Hans that we live in a world that's infinitely better than the world only 10, 20, let alone 100 years ago. Status quo is not an option. We need to do better, but I think we're on the right path.
Sustainable development theme and our last topic.
We looked at technology, generations, and inequality so far. Now let's look at connectedness from even wider perspective. Recently, all countries of the world adopted sustainable development goals, laying out a path until 2030 to end extreme poverty, fight inequality and injustice, and protect our planet. We are all in agreement on where the world needs to go. Fulfilling these ambitions will take an unprecedented effort by all: governments, civil society, and businesses. Global goals want to connect economy to the people, decouple economic development and pressures to the environment, and leave no one behind. And businesses globally have an important role to play in this effort. The last question today for you is: how can companies contribute to this global ambition?
So I'll follow up with this question. Generally, for these topics, I have only 3 questions. We'll finish up what trilateral is bringing to all these topics, if we started. And then, Aisha, you will see if you will open the Q&A in sense of timing and everything. So the business role, is it increasing? It's becoming more important? Is it doing the right things? Who will start?
Actually, I think this is an area where business is leading. In reality. So there's, of course, we have all the conferences around the globe where we talk about climate change and we talk about circular economy, where it really happens and where it's really big changes is in the companies, actually. And that's where you see the advantage of having, goal-oriented organizations, not political, where people are used to be actually, accountable for what they promise to deliver. And I see that, here with Heineken, for instance, Lasco in this country, Union, where we see how water usage being reduced significantly ahead of global targets. When I see how we reduce carbon dioxide, how we improve road safety. In my previous role as CEO of AkzoNobel, we were able to completely change the mindset around waste. Waste is actually raw material. Think about how you use it, and actually you see that you benefit the company because rather than you cost, you see revenues, and you significantly reduce waste. So if there's one area where business is really leading and sometimes screaming for help from governments to further accelerate, if you think about the climate problem, we will not solve it if there's not a global price somehow on carbon dioxide emissions. So if there would be, even if there would be a European system, an American system, as long as you have a price on carbon that gradually increases, you see magnificent opportunities. Business knows where to invest in the future to reduce the emissions. We just need some support from governments that should stop talking and actually create the right kind of regulations.
Well, I'm glad that Hans opened this, because it's not always that we could claim that business is at the forefront of progress and making this a more sustainable world, but I agree with you that lately we have come a long way and should be quite proud of what business, following criteria, objectives that are not that different from the previous decades, but using the approach that is much friendlier to the environment, we have done. And it's also sad that at the same time we have governments who perhaps 20, 30 years ago were the ones saying, well, we better do something about it and businesses should follow our lead and initiatives, are to a large extent, in many instances, lagging behind. So basically it's a disconnect between business community worldwide, including the Indians and the Chinese, who were the big polluters, and they now realize they have to do something about the planet and its future. And the governments, alas, among the most advanced countries, are not doing enough and maybe the ones to blame. So how do we find a dialogue, how we can appeal to the politicians who traditionally have been very critical of businesses that are just very myopically looking at the quarterly bottom line and distributing bonuses to the top brass, to engage them or to somehow force them to follow. And I think it'll be an interesting situation to watch how things will develop in the still most powerful country in the world, where things politically are going in a disastrous direction for the planet as a whole and the future generations, and the business community and cities, where there seems to be more enlightenment in this respect than at the federal government in the US, to be very explicit. And I think we should continue and not be discouraged by some drawbacks that clearly we can take in the business community a longer-term view and perhaps a more responsible attitude than politicians who have to subject themselves to political cycles, electoral cycles, and so on. So overall, I think it's quite encouraging, and I hope we can continue this way.
I would add to business, Claudia, and you can, of course, comment the business, also the role of the individual, of me, of you, of the lady in red there on my right. So maybe you can combine that.
Yes, I wanted to comment that I'm quite optimistic still about that in the coming decades we will actually be able to find a lot of new solutions to address a lot of the sustainability issues we have now. And one of the contributing factors is that, for example, we are rapidly, in exponential pace, developing our opportunity to harness the power from the sun through solar power, for example. So the price is decreasing faster than exponentially, basically. There are innovations happening in Cambridge, Israel, about actually developing solar panel paint, basically windows that are able to capture solar power, which means that potentially the energy price will be going towards zero. And that will, of course, have a tremendous potential impact on global markets, but also enable us to really make use of solutions for sustainability that are now very energy demanding. I'd like to comment as well, and maybe challenge a little bit about the perspective of sustainability, that for me, sustainability, of course, goes quite beyond the climate and environment issues. And nowadays, most businesses definitely understand that our global resources are limited and there needs to be a very responsible basically approach and strategy towards sustainability, and that it can also be a great business opportunity. But I also think that in the coming years there will be more areas where businesses will also realize that a greater responsibility can be taken with relation to socio-economical issues. We're already seeing, for example, in Silicon Valley, that more and more businesses are realizing that the society has already become too divided between the ones that are homeless and very living basically below poverty line and the ones that are the super rich in the area. And that divide can't really be sustainable for the environment, the society long term. So it will be extremely positive to see that more companies also address even more issues in the sustainability work.
Sonia and Mark, Boris, if I just add to business individuals a little bit about politicians. I would say that generally I miss the role models. I miss them for sure in politics. And I think, I'm asking myself, how can you be so ignorant to say there is no global warming? So maybe you can comment on all the three aspects and sense of the sustainability and sustainable development.
Okay, let's start with the business. I think that when there is a shift in overall mentality, business follows. There are some businesses that are really, let's say, value-driven, but I wouldn't bet on that in general, because we have to have a lot of businesses going for it. And when business sees that people have changed their minds, that there will not anymore be oblivion to how the company comes with the product, how much water it uses, or is it careful about the waste or anything, when that becomes part of the equation, who you will buy, that's when the people decide about the products, and the companies feel that in their pockets. So that's quite a huge incentive, and that's good. That's, in a way, if we think about Adam Smith and his invisible hand of selfishness doing the right thing. So now we see that there is a huge change in the world. If we compare that to 10 years ago, it wasn't so strong. Now it is really strong. And also it brings the demand from the younger people coming in the companies or starting their startups, that they want to know that they are doing a difference to the world. And not in a bad way, but in a good way. So that's also another huge push. So it is a mentality change of the planet, I would say, that's unstoppable. On the other hand, of course, the problems we are facing are also unstoppable, so we have to be much more fast with that. And here, we can talk about the clash of generations. That the youngsters are, I haven't met anybody who would think of the climate change not being an important thing. And you could see people in politics say, it's not that important. And there was a research actually done that in general media, there is on that issue, just as well as on vaccination, it's practically the same, that media wants to portray themselves as objective. So they show pros and cons, and it's like 50-50% of the topics. But when you go and research into scientific research on climate change, there is not one article found that would say that human hand is not responsible for the climate change. Not that they would say that there is, but there is not one scientific publication that would confirm that we have nothing to do with it. So it's a huge difference. You have 100% on one side and 50-50 in general public. So that is a little bit of a craziness that's not that understandable to me. And some politicians like to bet on those 50% that's unsure, and that media portrays it, because it puts them in a little bit different position. And people, we don't like to change that much. And that means coming back to me. I have to, when we look at how many trash bins we have in front of our homes, it's just adding. And I don't mind doing that. But if you would ask me that 15 years ago, I would say, are you crazy? I'm going to I have to devote so much space just for the trash bins. That's changing, and also the business is changing. So the politicians, I think that in Slovenia we are very for that, because we have the mentality towards green environment and we want to protect it. So maybe we're a little bit further on than some others.
Maybe you choose just one of the topics.
So I would say that we need to understand that governments don't innovate. It's the businesses that innovate. And you cannot change people's attitudes and mentality by a governmental decree. And I think that's pretty important to understand. Now, when it comes to businesses and our wider responsibility, it's obviously huge, but I'll say it just like that. If we as consumers will be aware and smart, our companies will act responsibly. If we as citizens will vote smartly, our governments will be smart and efficient. And if they aren't, either the government's smart and efficient, if the companies aren't responsible, then it's not something wrong with them, it's also something wrong with us. So this is our responsibility, and let's take it.
We haven't saved the world, but I think we brought an interesting and global debate to Slovenia. And this is what trilateral is about. And because the microphone didn't work before, we should give the last word to Aisha Vodnik, who is running this AmCham here in Slovenia amazingly and is creating the podium for the global debates. So Aisha, please.
Hey brother, thank you for this great discussion. Really so many interesting, it's impossible almost to sum up what you've said, but I am certain it's a fruit for thought for all of us. And it's so important that we do discuss global topics. And with that, I would really like to thank you, as I would like to thank you again to Pokojninska družba A. And Carmen, I know your company is really corporate responsible also to telling us that we should be not only corporately responsible, but also responsible as human beings. So with that, we'll see the last clip. And I thank you all, especially to the great panel.
Živimo v obdobju obrata generacij, ki ga zaznamuje vedno večje število starejših in vedno manjše število mladih. Spremenjena razmerja povečujejo pritiske na pokojninske, zdravstvene in seveda tudi druge sisteme, zato je razprava o posodobitvi medgeneracijskega dogovora nujna, če želimo vsem generacijam v prihodnje zagotoviti primerno blagostanje. Če smo bili še posebej v Sloveniji v preteklosti navajeni, da je država poskrbela za naše pokojnine, se moramo danes zavedati, da del odgovornosti za našo prihodnost leži tudi na nas samih. Prva stvar, ki jo lahko naredimo za svojo prihodnost, je že ta, da izkoristimo edino davčno olajšavo, ki nam jo država omogoča, to je olajšava za pokojninsko varčevanje, ki jo kljub možnosti znižanja dohodnine izrablja le 4% zaposlenih v Sloveniji. Želim vam okusen zajtrk in zanimivo debato o moči sodelovanja med generacijami.
Hope you did have some breakfast, but I would like also to say to Trilateral, thank you that we could be part of the beginning, and I know you'll have an amazing weekend, and I'm certain that you will love the only country in the world that has love in the name. Enjoy.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hvala.
Super.